Hey guys, as you can see, I've decided to switch up the format a bit so it looks more cleaner. So I hope you guys like it. Today we're going to be reviewing chapter 3 of Campbell Biology, which focuses on water and its properties. So let's begin with concept 3.1, which is polar covalent bonds in water molecules result in hydrogen bonding. The elements in a water molecule engage in a covalent bond with an unequal sharing of electrons, also known as polar covalent bonding. In this case, the oxygen atom is more electronegative compared to the two hydrogen atoms, meaning it pulls the electrons more strongly. This results in a distribution of partial charges indicated by the delta symbol, like in the picture on the right. So oxygen, in this case, has a partial negative charge indicated by the delta minus, and the hydrogen atoms have partial positive charges indicated by the delta plus. These properties of individual water molecules cause hydrogen bonds to form amongst multiple water molecules. The partial positive charge on a hydrogen atom from one water molecule forms a hydrogen bond with a partially negatively charged oxygen atom from another water molecule. Hydrogen atoms only last for a fraction of time but occur very frequently and can collectively act as a stronger force. This behavior of water molecules lead to very interesting properties of water, which we will talk about next. So next is concept 3.2, and it talks about the four emergent properties of water contributing to Earth's sustainability in life. So the first property we'll talk about is cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion is the cohesive behavior that occurs between water molecules, like how water congregates and creates like a film, like a bubbly film when you overfill a cup of water just so it doesn't overflow. The picture I have for the example is has like the cup overflowing, but you can see that little bubble, that little large space that's like protruding up from the cup, the water. That's a like behavior of water that occurs because of cohesion. Water's cohesive properties allow it to have a high surface tension so that some animals, like the spider on the right, can walk right on it. Next, adhesion is a property of water that allows it to adhere or stick onto other polar molecules like you see on the diagram to the left of the spider. So in this picture, you can see that the water is sticking onto the walls of the vial. The second important property of water is high specific heat. But before we talk about high specific heat, we must first understand what heat exactly is in terms of energy. So let's start with the definition of kinetic energy, which is energy associated with movement. This is different from other types of energy, such as potential energy. Thermal energy is the energy associated with the total kinetic energy a substance has. Even when substances like water appear as if they're not moving on the atomic level, like when you're holding like a cup of water, you can see that the individual molecules are in constant random movement on like an atomic level. This random movement of molecules is what thermal energy is. So while thermal energy measures the total movement, temperature measures the average kinetic energy. So those two are different things. And to better distinguish these two properties, imagine that you poured each bowl on the right with boiling water from one kettle. The temperature of the water in both of these bowls would be the same because the source of the water is the same. And when it was in the kettle, which is like the source, it was like, a specific temperature. However, the thermal energy of the water in the larger bowl would be higher because the bowl is larger, meaning it's carrying more water, so it's carrying more total energy. Okay, next let's talk about specific heat. The definition of heat itself is the thermal energy that is transferred from one substance to another. Specific heat is the heat needed for a temperature change in 1 Celsius degrees in 1 gram of a substance. So in the case of water, this is 1 calorie, which is higher than most substances like ethyl alcohol, for example, which has a specific heat of zero point 0.6 calories. And this means that you need to put in more thermal energy in water than most substances to inflict a temperature change in the same amount of it. So this means water can almost act as an effective reservoir for thermal energy, which comes in handy when stabilizing temperatures. For example, so any substance, including water, has the tendency to aim for equilibrium in temperature, like how when you touch an ice cube, your hands grow colder and the ice cube gets warmer. Hence, in areas near the ocean, the temperature tends to be very stable since the ocean water helps absorb the heat on very hot days and it releases heat on very cold days. We also take advantage of this property in water through the release of sweat, which helps cool our body down through a process called evaporative cooling, in which sweat that has absorbed our heat leaves our body through evaporating into the air. Um, the third important property of water is its density change upon freezing. So, water is one of the few substances where it is less dense when frozen into ice. This occurs because the bonding between each water molecules freeze into place and create this rigid crystal lattice structure when turned into ice. So, you can actually see that in the picture on the top. So 4 degrees Celsius in water is the transition point between its liquid and solid state. And this is where water reaches its greatest density. When above 4 degrees, water molecules begin moving around freely, which decreases its density. And when below 4 degrees, water molecules begin locking into its lattice structure, with 0 degrees being the temperature where it becomes ice completely. So this property allows glacier and ice to lands to float on water, like in the picture on the bottom, which could act as land for terrestrial Arctic animals like polar bears, and but it can also protect like Arctic fish from freezing. The Arctic fish that's below the layer of ice. The picture of the land ice that I have is like kind of shattered, but you can imagine like a large plate of ice that's just kind of covering the Arctic Ocean so that the fish under that like plate of ice aren't like freezing. So it kind of acts like an insulator and like a protective layer. And lastly, we'll be talking about water's ability to act as a universal solvent. But first, let's talk a little bit about solutions. So, a solution is a mix of a solvent and solute, where solute is the material that dissolves into the solvent, while the solvent is the dissolving agent, such as water. So, we call the solution an aqueous solution when the solvent is water. For example, salt water would be an aqueous solution where the solvent is water and the solute is salt. Water is able to dissolve solutes through the formation of hydration shells. In dissolving ions like table salt, so NaCl, they would first be divided into their respective cations and anions, where water molecules would create bonds with, like shown in the diagram at the top. So make sure to focus. One thing you should focus on with hydration shells is the orientation of the water molecules. So because the chlorine ions are negatively charged, they are attracted to the partially positively charged hydrogen atoms of water molecules, while in the case of the sodium, it's the opposite, as you can see in the diagram. Water can hence dissolve almost all types of hydrophilic or polar molecules, with some exceptions like cotton, which is a large polar molecule consisting of dense networks of a carbohydrate called cellulose. Hydrophobic substances like oil are obviously not dissolvable in water, but in the end, we label water as a universal solvent because even with all the exceptions, it can still dissolve a variety of things. The last concept of chapter 3 is 3.3, which reads, acidic and basic conditions affect living organisms. To understand acids and bases, you first have to understand that water can dissociate to two respective components, hydroxide, the OH minus, and a single hydrogen ion, or you can also just call it a proton. It's the H plus that you can see in the picture. There are two things you have to note about this reaction. First is that it's reversible, as you can see by the arrows. And two, in the real world, hydrogen ions do not randomly float around by themselves and instead are seen in the form of a hydronium ion, which is just a water molecule and a proton combined. So that's H3O plus. However, in the case of acids and bases reactions, we consider protons and hydronium ions like the same, so they're kind of interchangeable, but just know that in the real world, you won't be able to see protons just floating around by themselves. So now we can actually move on to acids and bases more deeply. The definition of acid is any substance that increases the hydrogen ion concentration of the substance it's added to. An example of this is hydrochloric acid, HCl. And a base does the opposite, where it decreases the hydrogen ion concentration. Examples include sodium hydroxide, which is NaOH, and ammonium, which is NH3+. Strong acids and bases will be indicated through a one-way arrow in their reaction equations. It's not that the reverse never occurs at all, but just that it occurs on such a small scale that it's negligible. You can see that with the hydrochloric acid reaction at the top. On the other hand, weak bases and acids like ammonium are indicated with a two-way arrow in their equation, like on the bottom. So the pH scale is what we use to measure how acidic a solution is. A pOH scale also technically exists to measure how basic a solution is, but we like to stick to one since they basically tell the same information. This is because in any solution, the product of the molarities of hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions always equal the same number, which is 10 to the negative 14th power. This means each component should equal 10 to the negative 7th power when in equal proportions, hence making the neutral pH level 7. pH is the negative base 10 log of the molarity of hydrogen ions, which means that the lower the pH, the more hydrogen ions and hence more acidic. For future references, whenever you see a lowercase p at the front of something, you can assume that it means the negative log of said quantity. Lastly, for today, we have buffers, which is a substance that helps resist pH change in a substance it's added to. They do this by accepting hydrogen ions when they are in excess and donating them when they're lacking. Buffers are usually a weak acid and its corresponding base. The function of buffers is especially important for vital functions in humans because our bodies are very sensitive to pH changes. Hence, our blood is able to retain an ideal pH at around 7.4 thanks to the presence of buffers. And that marks the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe if this content was helpful. And also feel free to comment any thoughts or questions on the video, and I will answer within a day or two. Happy studying. Thank you.